This is the Borth podcast, where smart ideas spark new opportunities. If you're ready to see money in a whole new way and build a life on your terms, you're in the right place. Hello, welcome back to the Borth podcast. Today, we're going to be finishing up a series with my good friend David Zapata, who's been on the podcast multiple times, brings a ton of knowledge and a ton of understanding, and really just I consider him my soulmate. And we think a lot alike, but yet we think so differently in a lot of different areas. So it's always good to have David on, so he brings a different perspective, different point of view. And more importantly, there's a lot of synergy as well. So it is fun to have David. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Always an honor, my friend. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So today, maybe share with the listeners what we're going to be headed to, because we started part one and part two. Now this is the third part of the series, just because there's so much to talk about in this idea of, obviously we're going to be talking about infinite banking, but it's more than that. It's more of a how to, what to do after you have something in place. So it is, but I want to bring it all together as why are we doing this overall? What's the why behind it? So David, if you wouldn't mind just kind of bringing it from where we started, why we started the first couple, and then why we grew into this list of 12. And if you could just share with the listeners, and if anybody's watching on YouTube, we'll be sharing some videos as well. So remember to go out to YouTube, subscribe, and like, and that way you get notifications when we have a new podcast come out if you want to watch it on YouTube.
Absolutely, Wade. I am very excited to have this. This will be part 3. If you're watching this for the first time, there's part 1, part 2 that you should go back to and listen in the podcast series. But this part 3 will wrap up this conversation we have around applications of or ideas around tough money mastery. And what do we mean by tough money mastery? You and I, Wade, talk all the time. We come across people that need education on their financial management, fundamentals, their relationship with their money towards their saving strategy, or how much liquidity they hold, or how do they think about their portfolio or their balance sheet, right? Basic financial literacy. And we pair that in our practice, teaching people these basic fundamentals with insurance strategies, life insurance, more specifically, the use of whole life insurance. And the other pattern I see here is that in the absence of some of this conversation around financial management, a lot of people that own perhaps life insurance or whole life insurance see it as a static piece of paper that they have for protection only, and they haven't understood the living benefits. They haven't understood the utilization of such an asset class. And our attempt here is to bring all these things together as a more, let's call it, advanced way of looking at it. In simplicity, there's a much more productive, effective way to take principles of tough money or financial management with the understanding that this asset class may help you address some issues in your life that you could be using whole life for protection, for efficiency in your cash flow, financial planning, etc. So I'm going to pull up a list with your permission, Wade, just to recap where we've been here really quickly. And these are the 12 ideas of tough money mastery we've been sharing in this series. In the first part, you'll recognize these topics: building a family banking business, buying vehicles more effectively, things like banking profits and sourcing debt, and also charitable donations. And when we thought about these first 4, we were thinking about, hey, from our areas of life ideas and frameworks, Wade, the 5 most important areas of your life include your spiritual, your personal, family, financial, and your community or your occupation side of the world. These first 4 represent the interaction or the purpose of having abundance in your financial area to create abundance in your either spiritual or your family area of life. So that's what you see there. In the second episode that we did in this series, we now connected that financial piece with your community or occupation. How are you benefiting either your business, your investment strategy, even the people around you with your abundance in your financial life? How do you bring that together? And today, the focus of this conversation will be about you, the individual. How do you think about your relationship with money affecting parts of your life that are very important, very critical? These are some of the top conversations we hear week in, week out, Wade. And to recap those topics today we're going to talk about how we think personally about the future. And we're going to talk more importantly about the retirement ideas or myths around accumulation. How is that serving communities today? And we'll share our perspective of how developing financial abundance today can improve that relationship with your future with respect to money personally. We're also going to talk about qualified plans. How qualified plans, decisions we make today for that future may be serving you in general. So it's another principle we have in our curriculum. And then we'll talk about a couple more things. Investing in yourself, the best asset you'll ever have. So, what about college education and education investments in general? How to finance that more appropriately to support your personal life? And finally, the realization, you bring this up to me all the time, the need for liquidity today, tomorrow, and the next day, ever present in our lives. How do we think more effectively about annual expenses and adding effectiveness to the dollars that are going to flow out through expenses in our life?
Yeah. Well done. I mean, it's hitting the nail on the head right there, David. And I think just to kind of recap it so people can understand, it's like, there is abundance. We want abundance in our lives in all these different areas that we just talked about. And, what allows us to have abundance in a lot of those areas is what we do financially, right? So it doesn't mean that the finances are the most important thing. There's not one thing more important than the other on those. It's just that finances allow us to have more family time, maybe. It doesn't mean it's better family time unless we're intentional about it and finding that abundance in there, or personally, or whatever we're looking for. But again, the financial side of it touches all of them, just like spiritual touches all of them as well. So they're all interconnected. And what we're here today to talk about, and what our passion is how does what you're doing financially bring that abundance in all those different areas? And so, because most people, they want to disconnect. What I see is like, I shouldn't say most people, a lot of people want to disconnect the finances from the spiritual, or the finances from the community. And quite frankly, I really believe, I know that's the wrong way to look at it, because if you try to disconnect those, then they can't work in conjunction with each other. And so we'll talk, and we've talked about this too, this idea of interdependence when we talk about family banking, right? There should be this interdependence in all things that we do, right? So we're going to talk about the personal stuff and the qualified plans, the college education, annual expenses. How is that interdependent with our finances? So I'll let you probably lead off with just talking about retirement myths of accumulation. So, because there's a lot to be said, there's a lot of noise out there, and what I'll share with you right now with the listeners, like this is just how I see it, and from years and years of experience. And all I would ask you to do is like, just imagine if you weren't conditioned to think a certain way, how would you think, right? If we can say, well, because there's a lot of conditioned thinking. So most people would say, oh, I've heard this 500 times from the financial entertainer on the TV or the radio. Okay, great, but what if he's not 100% correct? What if he's 80% correct, and there's a better way to find some efficiencies in that process? So I'm never about right or wrong. I think that's the wrong way to approach things in life. I just think that we have an open mind, and and we've heard this said too, right? There's two types of people, David. It's like those that hear something and believe what's be said, or hey, let me go and experiment, let me get educated and go see how it affects and impacts me, right?
Yeah. I think I have the same starting point as you, since you bring this up here, which is, in my belief system, when I work with anyone, including my family, by the way, I don't think there's anyone that knows better what's best for you than you. Like right. There's a reason you're living your life. And I think in the starting point here is, could it be possible that there's an alternative to how most people see this relationship with their money now in the future for purposes like retirement, which is one of those conversations that everyone has very emotional ideas attached to it. Everyone is very emotional to how and the outcome they're expecting, but there's not a lot of clarity if you start asking questions. So I think this conversation from the perspective of accumulation in particular, the retirement model of accumulation, is something we should at least set a premise and then discuss. What are the things we see? By the way, we're not saying our way or any other way is right or wrong. We're just exposing the fact that it's possible that there's more than one way to accomplish a future relationship with money by having abundance and achieving the same things you want and more. That does not necessarily require the typical financial planning, which I think is the premise we should discuss. Let's accumulate during our working years, and then let's deplete that accumulation or consume that those savings or those investments over time to live during the years that we are not productively part of the workforce or working or running a business. So accumulation, I see being the number one paradigm that people adopt, and there's not a lot of thought behind it. I will tell you something personal. This was the paradigm I was engaged with when I entered the labor force. I've told you many times, I remember going into work and understanding I needed to save and I needed to do some things. I do not remember engaging with it consciously. I know I signed some paperwork. I know I started a 401k. I know I needed to save for retirement and do XYZ based on what everyone was doing around me. But the moment I started asking questions about the details, I realized I did not know why I was doing this, how it worked, and what yield or result it was going to bring to my life. So it's a very subconscious, automatic process.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've just been conditioned that we have to sacrifice. We have to see it as a sacrifice, right? Sacrifice, sacrifice. And for those that have accumulated money in a 401k, I'll just say, congratulations.
Absolutely.
You're better off than somebody that hasn't. I mean, I'm not. That's what I'm saying. Is like there's a real positive aspect to the person that's disciplined enough to put some money away. And again, you've sacrificed, so there's an understanding there. But I don't say but. The outcome of that is so uncertain that we really have to ask the question of why are we sacrificing? Why? And I'm like you, Dave. When I first got in this business, this is where I started. I started by being that guy that loved and promoted and sold 401ks, right? That's what I thought was the world around it. When I couldn't I couldn't have a certainty in saying this is what you're going to get, then it made me start to think a little bit. It's like, is this really the realm I want to be in? Is this what I want to be associated with? Because I didn't see that I was productive, or I couldn't bring success to a 10-year track record. There's just no way to measure like what I did showed any kind of success for my clients, or was it just sheer luck? And so this idea of like we're meant to sacrifice, and then consume. And then when you consume out of fear, and you live in a world of uncertainty. And it is a tough. I've just seen clients that have gone through this, and a lot of the baby boomers have gone through this because back in '78, they brought out this thing called the 401k, and we started to see that transition in the early '70s to the mid '80s away from pension plans, these guarantee plans that brought you certainty and clarity and peace of mind that you're not getting because they transfer that risk over to you, the individual, and away from the corporation. So.
Yeah. Funny enough, I started in the workforce in the company I work for 2 months after they terminated pension plans for the entire company. So I was the first generation to miss that benefit. And that was one of the reasons that I started going down this rabbit hole of understanding what was the difference. And to your point, the answer that I found was exactly what you just said. It was a change in the risk positioning to who holds the risk. The company was offering before my generation pension plans that transferred the risk to the company to distribute a defined benefit, and move that risk to the bottom 97% of the employees with defined contribution plans, whatever the vehicle is. But again, the premise being still, I'm going to have to accumulate for the next 20, 30, 40 years, however long I'm going to wait, so I can experience a certain lifestyle in years later on. So that was also something that prompted me. And when I learned about where the idea of retirement came from, it was fascinating. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or if you want to talk more about that.
Well, I do want to talk about it, but I want to touch on something you said too. I don't know if the listeners heard this. This idea of, you said the bottom 97% were forced into doing a defined contribution plan, a 401k type of plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 401k.
Yeah.
How about the other 3%? What did they have? Did you ever get into that and think about that?
Well, the top 3% of the corporation gets special treatment with different programs that guarantee certain benefits for retention, protection, and rewarding of those top 3% executives in the country. They, by the way, make the rules. They influence the decisions on how things are structured, and they choose other deferred compensation mechanisms, including life insurance strategies, by the way, that ensure their risk transfer back to the company because they use products that come with guarantees to make sure that they're taking care with their future relationship with money.
I don't know. I would ask anybody that's listening, think about what David just said there. The people that, Nelson Nash in his book, Becoming Your Own Banker, he talked about the golden rule. Those that have gold rule, right? And, but think about this, the person that owns the business, the 3% that own the business, run the business, have decision-making abilities. They have 97% of the people go under a separate plan, and they go under a plan that's, do you think it's better? Or do you think it's worse than the plan that the 97% are under? You can make your own call there, but I'm guessing that I know that the 3% are probably making rules that are more beneficial to them than they are to the 97%ers.
Yeah, and I think it is an opportunity for people to still continue to save. All the things you were saying earlier, we by no means are saying good or bad. We're just establishing some facts that we see. But I think it's interesting that that transfer of risk happens to the bottom 97% and is presented as a benefit, as for you that we're doing this, right? This is a benefit that the companies you're lucky that you have such a great plan. We'll pair you you are with a very large company or hedge fund that will allow you to manage your assets. They call that assets under management. It's all presented in a way that is like, oh, you feel grateful that you have the ability to have that. Other people don't have it, and it is true. But remember, they're doing this in fairness, and they're offering this opportunity to every employee, regardless of gender or any, qualification, regardless of income, regardless of position level or rank, except they use non-qualified plans for the top 3% because they want to make sure they target their reward specifically to them that do not have to be offered to every single person in the corporation.
Yeah. So to your point, again, the idea of accumulation is not, I've never complained about accumulation. I just wonder, is it in the right sequence? In the previous conversations, we've talked about the path of money, and it is about the right sequence. The people, they earn money, it comes in, they spend it, they donate it, and then the right sequence is they would move it to savings. And we've been conditioned to think, I think over a long period of time, that putting money in a 401k or qualified plan is savings, when it's really not savings. And
Yeah.
but we understand, I think instinctively, that hey, we got that path of money makes complete sense to us. But it's been conflated about what the difference between savings and investing is, right? And so I think there's that, so we should separate that out. That's obviously key, and we can obviously have a longer discussion about that, but just understand that that's the proper sequence. But don't think what you're doing is putting money into Wall Street through a 401k or qualified plan or some sort of accumulation vehicle that your company sponsors is savings, because that's the exact opposite of what savings is.
Yeah.
It's been named savings, but it's not.
I'll repeat what you said there because in case the listeners have not heard of where this is coming from, in our live events, in our education events, we ask and we survey the people that we educate, and we ask them a question, which is, hey, does your retirement planning instrument, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, is it a savings vehicle for your retirement, or is it an investment vehicle for your retirement? And the most common answer we hear on doing this on many, many people now is both. The answer that we most commonly hear is the answer is both. Okay, and that would imply that in my balance sheet, my retirement planning serves both a savings role and an investment role, which is an impossibility because savings must represent zero risk assets allocated for our foundation of our balance sheet, and investments implied risk with the pursuit of growth. Those two things cannot live in the same planet, and we need to classify it properly. And again, we're not here to tell you which one it is, but I think that it's important that we establish a framework where we get clear about this. If it is savings, how are you mitigating risk down to zero? And if the risk is not zero, perhaps we properly classify it as an investment and we understand the risk we're taking on it so we can manage it properly. So again, you said this earlier, and I think it's important to say, like, we are not against paradigm of accumulation. And if you are already in this paradigm, if you're using vehicles of accumulation, if you are in retirement and you've done this is not a critique to that. It's just an awareness conversation. So you can be aware that you are carrying some risk, and that the risk of matching the assets you have with the liabilities or the expenses you have in the future is something you have to constantly be actively managing. You have to have a relationship with this. Most people every Friday automatically out of their paycheck, I was one of them, so I can speak from experience here, sending money from my paycheck, unbeknownst to me, by the way, to a large corporation that was buying equities, was buying bonds on my behalf. At what price, who knows, right? And I was doing this every other Friday with the hope that at age, whatever you want to call it, 65, I would have the income I need to live the lifestyle I wanted. And that is an equation that I truly didn't understand.
Yeah, most people do not question it. Quite frankly, now it's a law that you have to participate and you have to opt out of doing a 401k. You're obligated to opt into a 401k or some sort of qualified plan.
By default. Yeah.
By default, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna go back to something you had mentioned too, is this idea of retirement. And I this was something that was established back in Germany back in the late 1800s, I believe, if I get the timeline correct. But there's this idea of forcing people out of the labor market because there was a belief, a real flawed belief, that there's only so many jobs to be had. Right? This is the scarcity mindset that was there, and so they had to force people out. And so to make room for the younger workers, because younger workers they needed jobs and they needed more security, so they wouldn't riot and rise up against the political class. And again, it's a whole other discussion you can have, but it's just rather interesting, just that idea of why they had to have retirement. And that carried over when immigrants came to the United States. Like, we have to have this idea of retirement. FDR came into play, kind of the same thing with FDR. It's like, we'll give you some insurance, and this will be the timeline that you need to get out. Because, again, it's this idea of scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
And then people, they've been conditioned to believe that. So they go, I'm willing to sacrifice enough misery, enough of my happiness for, in the result of misery to stay in this job because I can see this age 65, 62, 67, whatever it is at the end of the rainbow. So I'm willing to stay in this job and not be happy in order to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's why we hear so many people like, I can't wait for retirement. I have friends of mine that talk about retirement as if it's like a great thing. I'm like, to be taken out of service is not my idea of fun. I want to be I see myself as being more valuable today than I've ever been.
Yeah.
And I see it 10 years from now to be even more valuable than I've ever been, because you can't make up wisdom and understanding, because sometimes it just takes time to build that callus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating if you think back to FDR, like some of the government solutions for this type of thinking and trying to think about it. Social Security is the prime example of this, right? Creating a program like Social Security that, by the way, immediately gets taxed because the taxation law was created right after the program was created, and also adjusted for expectation of lifetime that was probably age 65 or around 65, which is why that number continues to live in people's heads, right? The expectation was that people were going to only live a few years, and outliers would live really 5-10 years after that. So a lot of people in the workforce would support those few individuals, and that probably worked for a period of time. Now we've reversed that paradigm. I think the statistic is 3 people in the labor force support every person in retirement today receiving Social Security versus 30 in the past. If you go and look at the endowment of Social Security or the trust, right? The projections is that we're going to run out of money in 2030 something, whatever the number is, based on who's doing the math, right? But I think we continue to live with outdated ideas of a model that was brought from a completely different part of the world that did not have American values, capitalism, all these things, purpose-driven contribution, all these things that we talk about. And we've adopted it as the default option. I'm going to accumulate through my working years so I can then spend that accumulation through my retired life, starting at age whatever, 65. And I pray, that I don't outlive my money. Number one fear, baby boomer generation, by the way, is to run out of money while in retirement. So the things we observe that is, number one, there's a lot of risk transfer that individuals are taking by implementing that model for many reasons: duration, mismatching assets with the future costs, inflation, and misunderstanding future requirements for supporting those retirement years. All these things that a lot of times people don't have the education or the resources to really anticipate and understand, paired with the fact, and I think more importantly, that it introduces this idea of, hey, after a certain age, I don't want to do anything, and I, don't really care to seek purpose to continue to be productive. I can tell you, in my working years, also, I went through 3 rounds of layoffs, and I saw a lot of my coworkers in their late 50s, early 60s making this decision of early retirement. Before doing the voluntary retirement before the actual layoffs came, and a lot of people had a lot of frustration because it was a math calculation. Do I have enough to have, retirement income, blah, blah, blah. But the part that no one talked about was, the impact to their self-esteem, to impact to their purpose. These people are the most valuable at that age. They've accumulated years of experience, a lot of stuff that early professionals like me in that case didn't have, right? Those people are incredibly valuable. And funny enough, after those rounds of layoffs, a lot of the times the corporation was obligated after 6 years to go and rehire those people for a higher salary because they ran out of the wisdom that was in the room when they introduced those policies to move those people out of the workforce and bring young people like me.
Yeah, that's it's so funny because it's always about the driven part about today's dollars, and
Yeah.
That's a whole other discussion of how corporations today look in the next, the quarterly conference call where the company in the industry we're in looks at the next quarter century. But that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
But to your point, and this idea of, if I'm working in a factory, I probably don't want to do that the rest of my life. Honestly, I get where that conversation comes from. Somebody's going to say, "Oh, wait, but you don't understand. I might be an electrician and my body just can't handle that anymore." I'll agree with you 100%. But this idea of retirement is because we're giving a binary choice. You work for pay or you take your money. But what if the thought was, what if we could build up enough savings? And this is something that I know we've talked about in our family banking conversations that we've had. What if we had this idea of interdependence in our family, or interdependence with our money, where we have a close relationship with our money? I've heard you say that many times, David. We have this close relationship with our money, and we understand that I might not be an electrician at age 65 or 70 or whatever it is, because my body can't handle it anymore. But now I have a resource where I can generate enough revenue to help replace what I was using my body up for.
Yeah.
So I was trading the most valuable thing I had for money, which is time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you start trading it, and I think that's the whole myth behind retirement, is like, you're going to work and you're going to sacrifice and you're going to trade the most valuable thing you have is time for this money and for this future promise that may or may never get here. Right? We don't know the time we have on earth.
Yeah.
And so why aren't we living it today? Why aren't we living with those dollars today and having it work for us today and compounding for us today under our control versus waiting to that certain time 20, 30, 40 years down the road?
Well, I think we should get tactical here and double click on that thought, because now we bring this idea of top money mastery into what you're saying here, which is the real expression of it. Like, the part I think that I would bring right now as a maybe framework moment or education moment would be this. In our path of money, when we talk about income coming in and being used in four ways: spent, donated, held, or saved and invested. What we're talking typically about is income coming in the form of I work for money, like you're saying, trading time for money. And after moving through all the path of money, people typically automatically, not intentionally, will send their money to investments, equity in their home when they pay their mortgage and they see their primary residence as one of their key investments, a retirement account, a brokerage account. They automatically send that money in there. And it's not with the pursuit of creating cash flow. It's accumulation. So the balance sheet gets big enough one day that I'm going to be able to drink out of that straw through retirement without running out of milkshake. Okay? Yep. And I think what that misses is the realization that as that money accumulates, and we're not talking about not saving or accumulating money, because that's a really important piece of this. When we do it with the focus of putting that money in assets that eventually create cash flow, what we introduce is the paradigm of also having money work for us, which then reduces the pressure on us working for money, frees our time, and allows us to have a different pursuit of purpose. I hear that all the time from people that are sick of their job, nurses or people that work in a factory. They're tired. They've been doing it for 20, 30 years, and it's reasonable. It's not something that is fulfilling anymore. They're tired. They want change. But the truth remains that skill set they've accumulated for years is invaluable. Invaluable in places where they could volunteer and teach the next generation some of these skills. Invaluable in helping a young person launch a business with your expertise. Invaluable in so many ways that you could find purpose through contribution, through some of the things we talk about, significance. But that opportunity is only available and realistic if we see the path of money as a way to reframe how we have money, a money relationship where we introduce the idea of money working for us, and we see cash flow not in 30 years, wait, now. It's a way to shorten and compress that timeline. We all have the expectation of, it's going to be 30, 35 years down the road when you're a young professional. What if the freedom could come in 10, 15 years because you focus in a different relationship with money that opens up optionality? Hey, I could continue to work here, or I can continue to take my gifts and use them because now money's working for me and it's paying for my expenses and it's creating the lifestyle I wanted. Very powerful idea.
Yeah, it's again, it goes back to a lot of people see it as a trade-off. Either I have money or I have time, but I can't have both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what if the reality was you could have both? What if we had a process, or it's just a thought process and habits that allowed you to do both? Mm-hmm. Would you want to entertain that in your life? Would you want to at least be educated? Because again, it's just about awareness, education, and action. That's the bottom part of our pyramid. Do we have enough education? I can tell you right now, if you want more education on this, reach out to David Zapata. Reach out to me. We can get you a ton of educational resources. We've spent years putting together material for people to watch and have this make sense. That's the beauty of it. Is like there's a material, but what you need is the desire to say, is the path I'm going down the one that's right for me?
Yeah.
If it's not, if you feel like there's something wrong, you said, I know there's got to be something better. Then let's reach out. Let's have a conversation with myself. David, they can reach you. That'll be in the show notes as well. As like if Fact and Financial, go on there. You can find David. He's a leader.
Yeah.
And there is always an opportunity to have a discussion. And what if the worst thing you happen is you get educated and you go, I have some clarity. What I'm doing is perfectly fine. Then I'd be happy, you'd be happy, and the client would be happy, right, David?
Yeah. I mean, that's a healthy way to have this conversation. We are, again, not proposing that we hold the truth. We just have our own experience, and also we have a framework and education that we see applied to many people that want a different way of thinking. Accumulation and distribution is not for them. They're focused on cash flow, for example. They're focused on creating a certain lifestyle today and creating freedom. Some of these things apply to some of us. And then I can tell you, I used to work with a lot of people that were happy to do what they were doing. They were happy to do it until they reached age 60 or 65, whatever. And they were happy to do an accumulation that was going to be significant to have a prosperous retirement. God bless them. There's no right or wrong, in this framework. It's just, for me, I can tell you, for me, that model was not going to provide the things that I wanted to the level I wanted. So I needed to find a different solution, which is why I engage on searching for a cash flow based thinking about this. I personally don't have any desire to retire because I was lucky enough to go from a career that I had for over a decade and move into a space where I'm part of an organization where I'm a leader in my community. I lead my business, and I never really want to stop doing this. I love working with the people I work with. I feel free doing what I do, right? So I am not imposing that view on anyone, but because that's my stance today, I can tell you I never want to stop. So my idea of abundance in the future, to talk about that personal relationship with money, is continuing to create cash flow so I can express more in my spiritual life, with my family, with me personally, and to my community. Again, some people hearing that here will think I'm crazy. Again, totally, my wife probably would say I'm crazy. But the reality is that it's not for everyone. And some people hear that and say, you know what, that sounds like something I should educate myself around, and would be happy to share some of our resources with you.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is a journey. It's not like I can provide you one sheet of paper and it's going to completely change your mind or make that difference, because it's something you have to engage in, and you really have to embrace this idea of like, okay, maybe there's something different. Yeah. If you come at it with an open mind and then all of a sudden start asking questions, right? How does this suit me? Or how does this, what kind of certainty do I have? What are the things that you want? And does whatever product you're using serve that purpose? And it might be, our next point, I think point number 10, if you pull that back up, is this idea of qualified plans. And we've mentioned qualified plans along the way, just knowing that accumulation for retirement doesn't always have to be qualified plans, but we just know statistically that's where the majority of those dollars are at, right? So that's kind of how it leads into that whole question, because what was this statistic that we were sharing, David, about the amount of money in qualified plans? As far as the amount of wealth that people keep, or the majority of it's like 80% is in qualified plans in your house.
Yeah, it's a significant amount. I can tell you 75% of assets across American households is allocated to three asset classes. Their primary residence, qualified plans, and brokerage accounts. I think qualified plans represent 30 or 40 trillion dollars of wealth across American households, which is a significant amount of money.
Yeah. And I'm not here to tell you it's bad. I'm just saying, congratulations, you've put away money. But do you really understand what the qualified plan is? I've known clients that say, hey, I'm doing 20% of my salary into my qualified plan. And I just ask the question, how does that serve your purpose? I don't say right or wrong, but I just really ask the question, how does that serve your purpose? What is it you're trying to accomplish? Right? And if people understood, here's kind of a funny thing, just an observation on my part. I get a lot of questions about whole life. Like, how does it work? How's it structured? Why do we use it? Just a lot of great inquisitive questions, which I love. I love having those, because I love serious people, and people that are serious about their money will ask serious questions. But what I find really interesting from an observation, when I ask them just a couple of questions about their 401k plans, nobody has, well, I shouldn't say nobody. There's not a lot of people that have the answers that they're willing to ask me. You know what I'm saying? So I find it rather interesting, is like they're willing to investigate this product that's been around a lot longer than 401ks, because you realize 401ks have only been around since 76, 78. I think my brain's kind of leaving me, but it's only been around for a little over a quarter century, where life insurance, whole life, has been around for 2 centuries, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting. It's just an observation. But from the standpoint of why did 401ks come to fruition? There's a lot of reasons why that happened, right? And you can look at it and say, well, what was it? And I think part of it was the transfer of risk from the companies to the employees, because they didn't want to have to guarantee you, David, an income for the rest of your life, no matter how long that was. That's very risky when you have this open-ended liability,
Yeah.
especially when you do it over tens of thousands of employees.
Yeah.
So like, let's transfer it and let's sell it with a good idea. Like, oh, you have control now, and now you're able to take the market risk and take that off the company to take the market risk. Like, so it was funny, like you said, they sold it with a really solid idea of like, hey, we're doing it for your benefit. And and then the father of the 401k, Mr. Bina, he made the point. He's like, he's almost like a little bit upset because it was just a tax structure to eliminate or to defer some taxes for corporations, and then they turned it into retirement plans. He says it was never intended for that. And just one other thing, I'll get off my soapbox about 401ks. Is like the 401k structure. If you really read about it and the why behind it, not like all the minutiae and the details. If you really read behind it, the 401k structure is a beautiful structure for a corporation because it goes into perpetuity. The problem with you and I as human beings is that we don't live forever.
Yeah.
And so when we start needing money, there's a lot of things that come into play, like the sequence returns, and do we have ability to outlive it, and all those other conversations. But from a corporate standpoint, it makes perfect sense because a corporation is designed to be in business forever. So therefore, you want that asset to be around forever as well. And it doesn't care if it's high or low because you just keep contributing to it. And that's originally how it was designed. And then they took that design and they said, oh, this would be a good retirement vehicle. But without the idea of like, what's the longevity risk? And that was one question they never really answered on those plans. So it's kind of interesting, this whole idea of 401ks being used for the primary retirement vehicle for employees.
Why point out to you that they're transferring risk back to you? The banks are not in the business. The entities that offer these programs are not in the business of discouraging you from using them. So why would they point to you the risk transfer, right? So absolutely. Right. I'll tell you, I think about this as a really effective example to learn in terms of narrative and in terms of influencing thinking across communities. It's fascinating how effective Wall Street is at normalizing standards and creating a skepticism of everything that is against their best interest to use that model. Big brother power, right? You go to every large corporation in the country, you standardize. This is the default option for you. You have to opt out if you don't want this program, and we're going to offer you incentives like matches or things like that, tax deferrals, things that people hear a narrative around and it sounds really attractive and they know nothing, make decisions. Again, I was one of them. And then you offer an alternative to compare, and a skepticism and questioning comes in because it's not the norm that you've heard your neighbor, your coworker, all your entire life talk about. So it's a fascinating example. And I'll also say again, you and I are not intentionally, we're not financial planners. We're not certified financial planners. So we don't advise anyone with respect to their qualified plans, but we obviously have personal opinions and we also have experiences ourselves. So let's talk about some of the questions and some of the conversations we have around here to help the audience think through some of this. I'll tell you the first question I ask. The first question I ask is obvious. Hey, tell me, what does it mean for this product to be qualified? What do you mean by qualified plan? Do you know what qualified means? And I get fascinating answers to that way. Most people don't really understand what the qualified part of it comes from. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would have a follow-up question to that, Dave. Is like, who gives you the authority? Who gives the authority to be qualified? The government.
Yeah.
This is it's a government. Nelson Nash, I think, coined this. Is like, I find it ironic that the government creates a problem and then they go ahead and they create the solution to dole out to the people that they think wants an exception to the rule, right? So the problem is taxation, and they go, hey, we're going to have this thing called 401k, and we're going to have a government run program that most people, if you would ask, how do you want to participate in a government run program? And they're all going to probably say no, but they are in Social Security and they are in a 401k plan or IRA. They're following the government rules in the government rule book, and then they get appalled when the government changes the rules. That's that whole thing. It's because it's qualified by the IRS.
Yeah.
I just choose, myself, my family, we choose to not participate. Pretty simple.
Yeah. So we probably won't go too much in depth in here, but let's just point out some of the elements we see in our education when we talk about qualified plans. And by the way, if you want a great video on how to analyze the mechanics, the math behind a qualified plan, we'll be happy to share that with you in our qualified plan education. But I'll just cue it up and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Through that education piece, all we talk about is the following. There's a risk transfer back to you. You just haven't looked at it in the following light. So it makes me think of Mr. Bogle from Vanguard. He says, you end up putting 100% of the money, you end up taking 100% of the risk, and you only receive 30% of the profits. And the reason he makes that statement is because in a qualified plan, you are the person funding, you're having these contributions. That's what it's called, defined contribution plan. By the way, it's qualified because of the government, and the government also will tell you how much you're allowed to put into these programs on a yearly basis, right?
And how much to take out. Don't forget the backside of it.
Correct. In the now, they'll tell you how much, and they'll definitely slap your hand if you want to touch it before you turn 59 and a half with a penalty of 10% because, again, you're not qualified to manage your own money. We are the ones qualifying you to save or invest or both throughout this period of time, and then we'll allow you to then have access to this money after that. So you take on some of that risk, and then you're going to invest. You're going to allocate that money to a mutual fund, whatever the investment vehicle is. If you ask yourself questions about this, I did this with myself. Do I understand the prospectus of the mutual funds or ETFs or whatever it is that I'm using to invest, the equities, the bonds? And a lot of times I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, I've read this paper 12 times. There's pages and pages and pages of this that I doubt people working in these funds really understand. They're making decisions to rebalance and change things internally, fees that they're very, very difficult to understand. And if you hold a bunch of them, it becomes like very blurry equation. So I couldn't understand it. The names of the funds sometimes are fascinating. Guarantee, protected, blah, 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 plus shield, blah, blah, blah. It means nothing, right? So just ask yourself those questions. Do I understand how the mechanics of putting money in here, how the money is used, and then the expectation is that it's going to grow, but do I really understand the risk or the variation or the volatility in that growth? And like you said, Wade, they'll control when you can access this money, and when you access the money, guess what? The reason we were putting money in here is because it offers us a couple of incentives. One of the incentives is, my employer may match my contribution up to a certain amount. A lot of people misunderstand that. So please make sure you understand how your matching works. If your matching is very strong, I would encourage you, if you still want to use these plans, contribute up to that match, because it might be a great way to continue to boost your investment strategy towards future income after you no longer continue to work. Another incentive is to defer taxation and use pre-tax dollars, depending on the vehicle you use, Wade, to save and invest into the future. I would say invest, let's be honest. It's not both, right? And the part that people miss is that when we do that, what we're doing is not only deferring, because it's not tax-free. We're deferring, we're postponing, they would say in plain English, the taxation of that money that we use to invest for the future. But we're also postponing the calculation of that money, Wade. I don't know if you've had recently conversations about that, but every time I bring that up, it's almost as if they've never heard what I'm trying to say to them.
Well, I think it's a little bit foreign, right? So let me just reframe what I heard you saying. They're not just deferring the taxes; they're also postponing or deferring, however, whatever word you want to use, the tax calculation. So what does that mean? What's because I've heard this before. Oh, I get a benefit. I'm able to put in Uncle Sam's money into my 401k. Yeah, that's true, but you also have to pay Uncle Sam at the end. It's not like you can get away with free calculation. So now you have a calculation on a bigger account, hopefully, right? Hopefully that's always the intent. The account's going to be bigger, so when you need money out, you're having to pay taxes on that. But the tax calculation is now the bigger part of the equation. And why is that, David? It's because, do we know what the tax rate is today for this year? Yeah, we do, right? Yeah. Do we know what it's going to be when I'm 65 or 70?
You don't. Yeah.
And where do we think from looking at a $35 trillion national debt, where do you think taxation might go? I don't know. My crystal ball has been broken on that ever since I got into the business. But I can almost guess where it's not going to go, which is down.
Yeah. And I haven't asked a single person that follow-up question. Where do you think taxation will go into the future after they realize they postpone the calculation of those taxes? And I have not gotten the answer down. The idea is that they know taxation will increase, but the justification is that, my lifestyle in the future will represent less income, which means that I will have a lower calculation. And it's an assumption that we make. But if you ask a couple of questions after that, you'll realize that that is an assumption based on a narrative. It's a narrative. It's literally a narrative that Wall Street, I'm convinced, has put in people's head. Don't worry, when you're retired, you won't need as much spending. You won't have as much money. Let's have a less abundant life in the future, scarcity, like you're saying, and your taxes won't be a big deal. But how do we know if that's going to be the case?
Yeah, it's funny because you say that, and I have a brother that's retired, and he goes, every day is Saturday except for Sunday. What do you do on Saturdays? You go on vacation, you go do this, you go spend, and he says, it's pretty easy unless you have to be very disciplined because every day is Saturday except for Sunday.
Yeah, so, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, so this idea of scarcity and spending less, and I'll touch on one of the things, because we have a whole segment in our Factum University where we can talk a lot about retirement plans, but here's another one I'll touch on. I'll leave it because I hear it. Is like, I always ask people, what do you think the fees are, right? Because they see that the match being this holy grail, and when you run a calculation, you can see that the match basically, maybe, hopefully, covers the fees, the ongoing fees over the life of that 401k, because those fees come out each and every year on a bigger account. Yeah. And so from that standpoint, and then the other side of the equation is they all think it's 1.5%, but what they don't do, and what they're not obligated to do, is report all the fees, because they have transaction fees, they have all these other fees. And all I would ask you to do is just really quickly go on and say, what are all the fees inclusive in a 401k? And it can go all the way up. There's a Fortune magazine article that I've quoted for a lot of years that says it can be between 4 and 6% of your assets year over year when you include all things, right? The management fee and the fund fee maybe are a 1.5 or a point, even if it's a Vanguard fund, but they have all these trading and transaction fees and just a bunch of other stuff. And again, I don't want to go into that right here now, but just think about that. And all I'm asking you to do is think and research versus just take blindly that, hey, this thing is cheap to own and I'm getting this match. Well, when we have a really interesting calculator through Truth Concepts, that when you put it in there and you see over time, the company walks away with all, the fund companies will walk away, the 401k companies will walk away with all the government or all the employer match.
Yeah, I agree with you. That video, I had to watch it many, many times as a student to really understand, my God, what are we looking at here? I have never heard this conversation in this slide. The punchline, if you haven't seen it, is at the end of the day, the rate of return that the government receives by partnering with you, because they are your partner. That tax deferral means that both of you are investing in this vehicle and the government has its portion in that investment. The rate of return of the government ends up being later greater than the rate of return you receive. This is not a favor they're doing to you. It's a solution to a problem they created themselves. If they truly wanted to help us, they would eliminate taxation, not giving us excuses to defer that taxation and that taxation calculation. But with that, if we zoom out and we connect these two things, and maybe we move into the third topic, where it is, the conversation we're having here is that if you go back to that tough money mastery principles and that path of money, what we just discussed is, if we properly sequence things, we should have a path of money where income becomes cash flow that we spend, donate, that we hold or we save for our foundation of our balance sheet in liquidity, and then intentionally we invest for the purpose of cash flow. The accumulation model is not doing that. The accumulation model is making investment automatic by skipping or going around the holding box and automatically every other Friday sending money to mortgage to increase the equity in your home, or a retirement account, or a brokerage account. And then you have to intentionally think about saving or holding liquidity, which is backwards. That puts people in a position where they're deferring the accumulation of that money for 30 years to have a lifestyle in the future that is uncertain because of all the risks they're transferring back to themselves. And products like qualified plans are used and incentivized to give a better rate of return to the government, to benefit the companies that manage these programs through fees. By the way, I get this all the time, Wade. Oh, you guys are in the life insurance space. It's such a high fee product. It's probably the most profitable product out there in financial services. And I tell everyone that tells me that, if that was true, Goldman Sachs would be selling life insurance. Do not get it wrong. Goldman Sachs would be selling life insurance if that was true. The reason they are in the assets under management space is because they're taking a significant amount of money every year in fees, whether you go up or down in your balance, in your account, and they're taking a portion of the profits every time they create a surplus. That is a very lucrative business model, which is why Wall Street exists and is trying to dominate $40 trillion or $30 trillion in qualified plans across American households. So all we're suggesting here is that if you're engaged in that, there's an opportunity to maybe understand some of these principles in tough money, rebalance your portfolio, transfer some risk back to other entities that can bring you certainty and guarantees and create some stability for your retirement income, or if you want to think more like us for future passive income to continue to live the life you wanted now and in the future. So this model for us is very cash flow driven and is using assets where we have more control and certainty. Wade.
Yeah, I would probably just, I'll put a bow on this real quick from the standpoint of, again, there's two models here. One is an accumulation model, which means sacrifice, accumulate up to a certain point in time, and then drain, then consume. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about is, what if I'm not saying there's no sacrifice, but what if we deferred some spending today, or, basically you have to save, there have to be money left over after you spend, so you have to have a control on the spending. And then once you do that, and then it's like, what can we be doing to increase our cash flow that we can use tomorrow? And we can use 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And then when we get to age 65, we have a big enough pool of money that's generating cash flow for us that then it's a choice if we want to leave, but we know what we have at that time versus hoping that the asset that we've accumulated can provide us that income that we want. And we don't know that until we get into retirement. So think about this, the uncertainty of that. We accumulate with the hope versus we're going to save, grow cash flow assets with, like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I have some certainty that this is going to work for me, and I know what that cash flow is going to look like. Yeah. So it's two different models, two different approaches.
Yeah. So to connect this with the last part of the conversation here, the topic about college education or annual expenses, Wade, I just want to put this one more model in front of us. So we just had a conversation about the path of money. Hey, if we hold things properly, the cash, the liquidity, and then we intentionally invest for cash flow. It doesn't matter if you're buying ETFs or equities that pay dividends. It doesn't matter if you run your own business and it's going to be a source of cash flow, or if you like real estate, or if you like debt. Whatever your investment strategy is, hopefully it aligns with your values, your skill set, your experience, your interest in the pursuit of continuing to have money work for you. And the other part that we need to realize is that a lot of people would say to me, hey, David, but it takes money to make money. That's the expression I would hear in plain English, right? And it makes me think of this idea, like what people are telling me in this model is, hey, it also takes savings to create some liquidity that then I can spend, that I can invest in from a spending perspective, so I can create a better skill set, like in education, or to sustain my lifetime through annual expenses or large purchases. So these are the last two topics that we wanted to bring in the interaction between financial and personal areas of your life. And I'll kick it off with this thought, and then I'll pass it to you. There is probably not better asset in your life than yourself. So investing in your education is always going to be in the direction of growth, in the direction of abundance thinking, because it's an asset that pays for the rest of your life. You continue to have that within you. Nobody can take it away. And I will tell you, I go into these rooms that we teach education seminars live, Wade. And one of the questions I love to ask is this: please raise your hand if you believe you could invest in yourself in certain education this year, where you could see as a possibility raising your income $50,000 this year. Every room I go to, Wade, people raise their hand immediately. In America, we believe that if we continue to invest in ourselves, it's going to be a direct correlation to how productive we are in the workforce, in the workplace, in business. And I love that because it's the mentality of our culture. But when we look at education, and when we look specifically at college education, a lot of times when we make that decision, and I love, because you and I have opposite contrasting examples of this. I'm trying to prepare for my toddler kids for a decision that I'm likely going to make in 10, 15 years. You are going through this right now with a young adult child that is making this decision. And how we have conversations about this is what makes, I think, the difference in interdependence. Most people will look at college education as a given. They look at tuition as an expense, and it will be the end of the conversation. And you and I try to coach people into understanding how do we underwrite this as one of the best investments potentially we can make for you. Whether you're going to Harvard or you're going to plumbing school, it doesn't matter. The idea is how do we see this as an investment into your skill set for you to be able to give value to your community. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, so I'm going to go back just one step backwards, and I'm going to talk about the person that has put all their money in accumulation. I've seen this, I've talked to people, and what this idea of accumulation, it creates a pressure on a family. And it's called financial pressure because we don't have liquidity. So then we get to, because again, all that means is that they're fearful that if something happened to their job, to their life, to the economy, whatever it is, they don't have enough liquidity to either survive or take advantage of. That's the whole premise behind Tough Money, by the way. And so we have a whole curriculum on Tough Money, and I would love to share that whole curriculum with you. If you want to reach out to us, we'll share that with you. But the point being, we get families now that go to college. Maybe everything's working out all right. They've tried to save. They maybe don't have saved enough money. And now they're thinking, what am I going to do for college? And then so they say, well, we'll take loans, or we'll take a home equity line of credit, whatever it is. But again, it's always dependent on somebody else giving them the thumbs up or thumbs down that they can make that move. And so, and when you start looking at cost of college, you're going to go, oh, that's a huge expense. That's a huge burden on my cash flow, on my daily cash flow. So what am I going to do for that? It creates the tension in the family. Even for people that have prepared for this, it creates a tension in the family. So the question is, what can we be doing? Can we be doing something different than? I'm here to tell you that education, it doesn't have to be college education. Like you said, I'm a firm believer in it. Anytime you can better yourself, you reach your fullest potential. Anytime you get closer to that, the better off you're going to be. That's hands down. I don't think there's any argument about that. Yeah. There can be an argument about college education. Is it worth it? Yeah, I've seen arguments about it. I'm going to say for each individual, you have to make that your own choice. Depends on what you want to do. Where is it you want to have growth in your life? How do you see abundance? So it's like investments. They're unique to every individual. Yeah. So I'm not to say college is wrong. Right? Wrong. Is it worth the money? My son's going to be going to college, at least initially. It's interesting. We have a couple of his friends are a little bit older, 1 or 2 years older. Now they're in the third year, and they said, I don't think college is for me. So they went 2 years and decided to do something else. But whatever. That's just the way it's going to work out. The question you have to ask is, how are we going to fund that? And is it a burden or is it a benefit?
Yeah.
I think that's really where you're going. And so if we don't have money, it becomes a burden. If we have money, it's a benefit. And then comes this idea of interdependence. And I'll give you just my quick story. It's like my son is going to go to college, and hopefully he goes to college and does phenomenal things, right? That's the whole purpose. Like he's going to grow, he's going to grow a lot of different ways. And when he gets done, they'll be like, okay, son, we spent these amount of dollars. What's our plan to pay it back? And that is the interdependence, because he's going to spend it either way. We are, or he is. And so what is our plan as a family? Because we're a small family. And we understand that that's a cost that went out, but now we have to account for that cost and we repay the coffers with some interest. That's just the way you run a family banking business. Yeah. If you look at it from that standpoint, then it becomes like, now it's an asset. It's not a liability. I think that's a real key. So that's from somebody that's going through the process. And then also just a real quick caveat to that. If you fill out your FAFSA form, and anybody that's has a junior in high school going forward knows what a FAFSA form is, whole life insurance with tremendous cash values are not counted in that calculation. We had one of our agents at Factum who's got 529 plans, and they forced him to have her spend her 529 plan before she could get any financial aid. I mean, think about if he would have known that, no way he would have done that. It's like, let's get financial aid and then have them spend. Maybe it's a dollar for dollar spend, but they forced her to spend that pot of money before they get access to financial aid. One of my policies, the money's there, nobody looks at it, so they don't risk it.
Yeah. Well, I hear you talking about two conversations, just to make sure I hear you properly. But I hear you talking about the conversations, values, the mindset we should have about making this decision. I'll tell you, for the Zapata family, for my wife and my kids, this is no different than underwriting a real estate piece of property. It's the same idea. We're going to have conversations with these kids. And obviously, granted, my kids are young, right? But we are having conversations about it now so we can be prepared for the future we're going to live through. And by the way, I don't see this as traditional just college tuition. I don't care if the expense is going to be masterminds with other business owners. I don't care if the expense is going to be traveling around the world as part of their education. I don't care if it's a vocational type of school. One thing I'll tell you, Wade, is I do not want to condition who my kids become. I think that's a decision that they need to personally unfold because God put it in their heart. Whether my kids are artists or athletes or business owners, it's going to be up to them. The part that I do want them to follow me and my wife through is that they are going to have clear about how we finance things like that, investments in themselves through education in general. And that is a conversation, again, we are establishing as a family. We're documenting this because by the time they're older, we want to be prepared for this as parents. We're the leaders in our family. So I hear you. One of the things I would say lacking in the communities that we see is there's not a lot of intention in this conversation. It's a conversation we start to have when we enter the years preceding that school, and then we think only about how are we going to pay for this is the conversation, the extent of the conversation. That was a conversation for me, by the way. When I was living in Colombia, my dad paid for college. I have no idea how much it was. I have no idea how he was paying for. I was never part of the conversation. I was grateful. My dad was, a loving father that supported me. And then when I moved to the United States, I worked through school so I could pay for my tuition, and I took some student loans. I do not remember signing forms. I do not remember how much the loans were, the interest rate. Like, I had to figure all this out after I finished school and I started working so I could figure out what I needed to pay on a monthly basis. None of that information happened before I signed those papers. It's fascinating, Wade. So I'm sure around the country there's a lot of 17, 18-year-olds signing these documents, which is the number one asset, student loans, for the government, by the way. They're the only debt that cannot be forgiven, even if you go into bankruptcy, by the way. Over $1 trillion, $1.4 trillion in student loans. And we do not have proper education on how to have these conversations in our own families. And so that's one conversation. And the other conversation is what I think is the consequence conversation. Are we underwriting this investment with proper understanding? Because when you make an investment, you need to have an expectation of a certain return. And for everyone, the return is not the same. A lot of my friends, actually, when I went to school, went for philosophy majors, for things that they didn't know if they wanted to do with their life, things that they didn't know they were going to have an employment or income or future returns or launch a business. It was just, a decision, it's loans, it's deferred payments, no underwriting whatsoever. And the part that we do in our education is also to teach parents and students of the long-term consequence of this decision without proper education. There's an opportunity cost to financing college. There's an opportunity cost to the student that is going to make these payments in the future and could have taken that money and put it in an account and growing that over the next 60 years. You better earn more income than what that amount of money would have been in the future. And for the parents financing these payments, there's going to be the opportunity to have that money grow over time and represent future income, maybe at retirement or a passive income time. Sure. So all these things are sacrifices and opportunity costs that the parents are assuming, that the students are assuming. And we just need to have better conversations as communities, as families, to understand when we make them with the right intention. I also would imagine, and you can tell me more about this because I'm not experienced here, but I would imagine that me at 18 going to college with this conversation would have been a little more responsible. It would have not just seen as an opportunity to party and have fun, right? But I would have probably put more intention into how important and how responsible I needed to be about this time in school that I was going to have, the opportunity to have.
Yeah, 100% agree with that, David. Because it brings it back to having an adult conversation with the student that's going to go to college, and it's like, hey, you better be intentional about this because the impact is X amount of dollars. That's the impact, and then you show them the long-term impact. Now, again, a guy like me, I'm closer to the end than the beginning, probably, and so the impact to me isn't that big a deal, but the impact to him is huge because he's got a lot. His runway is like tremendously long, right? So. Yeah. That's 70, 80 years. And so when you start looking at that compounded effect, I was like, that's a decision. And it can bring it together. So these conversations can either bring you together or tear you apart as a family.
Yeah.
And I think if you hide it and you don't have the proper conversation, which that's what I love about our tough money and what we do at Factum, it's like we have a thoughtful conversation built around just this conversation here about, hey, is this college was it really cost? Not just in today's cost, but future cost. And then how do we recoup those costs back to mom and dad? Because maybe it's part of the retirement income and that type of thing. So it goes back to the financial and the personal parts in this personal circle. So.
Yeah, we've been going really long here, but I just want to make one last comment because I think it'll be the message we have, out of all these 12 ideas, which is true for annual expenses, and it's one of the reasons we probably put it at the end, Wade, which is the following. The realization that you need liquidity today, the realization you need liquidity now, tomorrow, and into the future. It's an ever-present need to have abundance in every area of our life. Hopefully, it's a realization you've had through all these 12 different topics. Annual expenses is represented still in this college education. I'll tell you a fun fact that I think about all the time. The average cost of college tuition, if you do a normalization between private versus out of state and all those conversations around college, right? Like it's around $20,000 in average for all students across the United States. But college cost has been inflating around 7 to 8% per year, more than any other item in the basket, in the consumer basket. What that means in plain English for a 39-year-old father of a 4 and a 2-year-old is that my cost of tuition by the time my kids go to college likely is going to be around $80,000 per year, Wade. Okay? I can tell you people putting $100 or $200 a month away on a 529 have never run this calculation, and they do not understand the pressure that this inflation puts into paying 80 grand a year in average tuition 10, 15 years from now. So we need more thoughtful conversations. And that is, again, one of those conversations around large expenses, annual expenses. If you zoom out and you think about how you're financing the purchase of vehicles, how you're financing your vacations, how you're financing travel, how you're financing education costs, could be other types of education, taxation, payments, for example, you'll realize that this opportunity of managing your liquidity properly by holding it and then later deploying to your expenses using assets like whole life, assets that give you guarantees, and all the benefits we've talked about in our education, I think it starts to play a movie where like this role of being the banker in your life is more important than you've recognized in the past.
That's well said, because it is just another annual expense when you have a kid going to college or you're saving for college. So.
Yeah.
But it is the big one, right? It is one of those that is growing faster, and it's more consuming than most other annual expenses. Yeah. So if you can understand how to treat that annual expense, or even the smaller annual expenses, there's really is no difference between, financing a car. It's the same mental concept that we have to get through, and the same habits. And then we go, now we just apply that to college, and we apply that to maybe it's a business purchase, whatever it is. It's the same concept. And it's just the idea of who controls the banking function in your life, which means where does the money flow? I'm going to probably just end this with saying this one more time. Just think about, in all these conversations, where is the money flowing? Is it flowing away from you or to you? Mm-hmm. If it's flowing to you in your control and in an entity that you own and control, isn't that better than having money flow away? We can get very technical. We can talk about 401ks and all the different structures, but just in a real simple form, how is that money flowing to you? Is it flowing towards Wells Fargo, or is it flowing towards you? If it flows towards Wells Fargo, either you're saving money there or you're borrowing money from Wells Fargo, they win. It's just simple as that. Versus, how about having your family win? I think that's the conversation. We can boil it down. We can have very deep technical conversations, but at the end of the day, it's like, where does that money flow? And are you respecting your money and you're treating it better than you would treat Wells Fargo's money?
Absolutely. Wade, thank you so much for having me for this series. It's been a pleasure. I love that we've touched on all the subjects. I hope your audience find it interesting and valuable.
I'm sure they will. So thank you so much for your time, David.
I appreciate you spending some time with me. Change starts with understanding, and action builds the future. We'll catch you on the next episode.